The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. And now introducing 2023 Sine Fellow Alida Garcia.
I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sine Institute Fellow Seminar today. My name is Edwin, and I am the co-president of Latinos en Acción, LEA, which is co-sponsoring today's event. Latinos en Acción is a student organization here at American University that is centered on uplifting and advocating for our immigrant communities. We foster a Latinx community at AU while advocating for immigrant rights, mentoring high school students, and also serving our local community. On behalf of Sine Institute and myself, we are so pleased to have you join us for this event. The Sine Institute is a laboratory for university-wide collaboration and an incubator for policy innovation, convening the best and brightest in the public, private, academic, and nonprofit sectors, as well as journalism. This institute is where the brightest minds engage to promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. It is where American University comes to convene, communicate, and collaborate. Today, we are honored to have Sine Fellow Alida Garcia and featured guest Jess Morales Rocketto, Alicia Menendez, and Cristela Alonzo joining us. Alida Garcia is currently the Vice President for Advocacy at Forward.us, a bipartisan advocacy organization primarily focused on passing common sense immigration and criminal justice reform policies. She has also served as senior advisor on migration for the Biden-Harris administration and has been a national leader in many immigration political fights. Our first of three featured guests, Jess Morales Rocketto, is a civil society leader, community organizer, and media entrepreneur. She is currently at Equus Research as Chief of Moonshoe Strategies, leading the organization efforts on new, bold, and long-term effects to build Latino political power. Also joining Alida is television commentator, host, and writer Alicia Menendez. She is currently the anchor of MSNBC's American Voices with Alicia Menendez and is the creator and host of the Latina to Latina podcast, as well as the author to the Likeability Trap. Completing this group of amazing speakers is Cristela Alonzo, an accomplished comedian, producer, writer, and actress. She has created and starred in the ABC sitcom Cristela, which made her the first Latina woman to create, produce, write, and star in her own U.S. primetime film. Alida Garcia has joined us on campus to share her experiences with immigration renovation and working to find a path forward for America's immigration system. Through this issue, she will help us interrogate how policy change damages or supports the building of a welcoming nation, and she will educate us on the nuances of navigating narrative and policy campaigns and how narrative choices impact individuals, groups, and culture. Please welcome Alida Garcia, Jess Morales Rocketto, Alicia Menendez, and Cristela Alonzo.
Edwin. We have special guests this time, friends, and I could not be happier to have three of the best with us. We will try to be serious in this conversation, but we have a lot of fun together. And so a little bit about what the goals are for today, and I already dropped my paper. I think I'm okay. So last time we dug into policy and sort of like a long arc of fights in the history of policymaking. But a lot that came up in that conversation and a lot of your questions was, well, what about what people think and feel and the cultural narrative that is either creating senses of belonging in America or dividing our nation from its ability to achieve policy change. And so today I'm really excited for you all to kind of get the textures of the differences of the spaces in media that these three women operate in, because you know, media is a large topic. A lot of you might be journalism students, public affairs students, but through these three women, we touch television shows, we touch books, radio stations, cable news, reporting for different outlets, building your own digital distribution channels, grassroots organizing as a messaging vehicle. I mean, really through the three of them, there's like a remarkable amount of engaging on immigration messaging at large in the nation. And so we're going to dig into that with all of them. In terms of the program, we're going to spend, because I know a lot of you are going to have questions, we're going to spend about the next 40 minutes in a panel conversation. But then we're going to spend a good 45 minutes of talking with each other and you all coming with questions and conversation. And it's okay if that veers off into career advice, because you got some of the best here. So please feel free to get off topic in what matters to you.
Also, any good gossip that you guys have about local students or anything, I'm here for it.
And I'm going to move up to the podium to make this even more awkward.
But just get the mic.
Okay.
Yeah,
There we go.
there you go.
We're also loud.
This is why they go in front of the camera and I do not. Okay, let's see. Is that on?
Do you want to give it to me? I'll share it with you.
Okay. Okay. So before, when you all walked in, because it's a classroom, we had you all write about what some of the things you think the American immigration narrative is. Thank you, Edwin. Edwin. So I'm just going to read off what people wrote down. So the American immigration narrative is different for every person, fixable, flawed, ×2, needs to evolve, pro-white supremacy, a political tool, a work in progress, filled with stereotypes, polarized and highly contested, polluted by the media, nationalistic, scary, diverse, a catalyst for societal change, both powerful and terrible, in need of national attention and transition, complex, full of many voices, polarized, very real, relatable for many, and restrictive. So thank you all for those contributions. Alicia, I'd like to start with you, because we're at American University and these are people that probably watch cable news as like a happy hobby. Would love to hear from you, from your perspective. At least for me as an advocate, I always feel like there's this like robustly organized right-wing apparatus on immigration that feels like it has like a consistent level of distribution every single day, that those of us that are trying to make America more welcoming feel like we're in an uphill battle against. Would love to hear from your perspective, like, how does news get made? Like, how do you get to pick what topics there are? Like, what are the things that drive cable news coverage in America? And how have you seen like the ability to bring immigration into that conversation, both something that's like supported or something that's like a challenge for you?
Can you hear me without a mic?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Alicia. Alida, thank you so much for having us all here. A few things that I think about. One is cable as a format means you have to explain something extraordinarily complicated in max 8 minutes, often in 4 or 5 minutes, which means that's not a whole lot of time to do explaining, right? So you have to sort of get out the basic facts, and something like immigration is something where there are decades of backstory. There is a lot of procedure and bureaucracy that is not something you can explain in 4 to 8 minutes of cable news. And so very often we jump in at what is the news of the day, the story of the moment, whether it is a change that an administration is making to policy, whether it is a border town that is unhappy because they feel that they do not have the resources to meet the demands that are currently incoming. But it's hard to get at the core and heart of the issue, which is, who do we as a country want to be? Do we want to be a country that welcomes immigrants? Do we want to be a country that welcomes asylum seekers? Do we want to be a country that is honest about the labor force that buoys our economy? Or do we want to bury our heads in the sand? I would argue that before we even get to cable news, that there are forces that have tried to make this an incredibly divisive issue based along race, based along geography, when in reality, we could fundamentally reimagine immigration in this country to be a force of good. We could see the US-Mexico border as a place where ideas and resources are traded back and forth, where there are people who are able to move freely in order to do seasonal work, who are able to enjoy parts of this country and then return home. But that is so far from the conversation we're having in this country right now that it almost seems unrecognizable, right? I think that there are places where the narrative has become really simple. It's based on fear. It's based on fear of the other. It's based on fear of the unknown. It's based on fear of whether or not your job will be here tomorrow. And people are willing to step in and give you a very simple answer to a very complicated question, which is, if you're feeling any of these anxieties, blame these people. Blame these people. And the images that go along with that support that fear. Right? Instead of seeing people as individuals with individual stories, with backstories about who they are and where they come from and what it is that is driving them to take that perilous journey north, we instead see them as masses. And that immediately changes the narrative, right? When you don't see people as people, but you see them as a force in and of itself. And so when you ask this question of how do we choose what to cover, I mean, in part, that is about what is the big story of the day, right? And I'm in a world where right now the big story of the day is democracy and preservation of democracy. And there's a certain TikTok to that every day. You wake up and you read the same news that I do. And so I think it is part of my responsibility to tie the immigration story to that, to say, if you care about democracy, if you care about the contours of what it means to be American, then you need to care about immigration. But that is always like a this fight, right? It's always making sure that there is space for that. And part of that is finding voices that understand the complexity of the issue, but don't feel the need to talk in policy jargon, because that reaches no one, that persuades no one. That is a losing proposition as it relates to news and information. So you need someone who can sort of come in very quickly, establish the facts, and then make an argument for what their vision of immigration can look like. The last thing I'll say before I hand it off is, I remember one of the jobs I had before I worked at NBC News, I worked at Fusion, which was this Univision ABC cable station. And I had the privilege of working with Jorge Ramos, who a lot of us grew up watching, our grandmas grew up watching on Univision.
She was the co-anchor with Jorge Ramos.
I'm not going to get this entirely right, but I remember listening to like Jorge on NPR or something, and he talked about how there are some issues in this country, like education, that even though we may see it as we disagree about how you provide the best education for America's children, there's just fundamental agreement that what we're all striving for is the best education possible for America's children. And that somewhere along the line, immigration became not that. It became something where there was a dividing line and you decided which side of it you were on. And that it became for journalists that if you believe that what we should have is a fair, functional, and humane immigration system, then all of a sudden you were an advocate and you had decided which side of that line you were on. And that boxed a lot of people out, I would argue, from covering this issue correctly, which is, like Jorge argued, to me, it should be like education. We all agree. We want an immigration system that is fair, orderly, and humane. How do we get there? That should be the conversation we're having, not do we want to continue with a system that we all agree is fundamentally broken, or do we want to talk about the possibility of what reform would look like?
Thank you for that. That is very much so my experience in the White House, which we could talk about over dinner. But just building upon that, would love to hear how you have done work through whether it be creating poderistas or founding the Families Belong Together movement, how you've taken everyday voices and made it simple for folks, but also gave them platforms to advocate en masse to force the discussion in the policymaker crowd or on TV.
Yes, I'd say thank you to Alida and also to everyone here at American. It's really exciting to be here. When I applied to college, I got into American and we couldn't afford it, and it was like my dream school. So it feels like a real like full circle moment to be here. So I'm really honored. By way of preamble, Families Belong Together is the movement to end family separation and family detention. We're the people who did huge rallies all around the world in 2018. The reason you know about kids in cages is that, among other things. And Poderistas is a digital platform for Latinos that's about making us feel powerful. We engage on Instagram, on YouTube, and also in Hollywood with talent. And then Alida alluded to it, but I'm going to talk about it a lot right now. So I also am the founder of something called Latino Media Network, which is the owner and operator of 18 radio stations, Spanish language radio stations all around the country. So I'm really invested in creating not only the narratives that we want to put forward, but also the infrastructure that it takes to actually put those narratives forward, okay? So the first thing that you have to have when you want to put something out in the world is a distribution platform, okay? People really forget this. And particularly in a digital world, I find that to be like alarming, mystifying and alarming. It doesn't matter what you say if you don't have anyone listening to what you say, okay? So distribution is like so key, and lots of people get right up to like, you know, ad nauseum meetings about talking points and spokespeople and this word or that word. And when I tell you that, like, you know, we're arguing about comma or no comma, been there multiple times. And less, way less about like, did anyone hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. So really it's so important to focus on like that infrastructure. And for me, that infrastructure is also very powerful because I spent many, and by spent, I mean, I'm still spending many years begging people to let me tell a story or to let the people that are actually affected by the story tell the story. And that is so fucked up and disempowering. Like, I just have no interest in that. I want to be the one deciding whose story gets to be told, right? And I don't think that's solely a personnel thing. I think that's also about like the systems that we're creating. So it's on what platforms, it's who the messengers are, it's what we're willing to talk about and how far we're willing to go, it's what kind of standards we have. All that stuff I think needs a little bit of a shakeup and a refresh. And certainly in my experience on this particular issue, especially. And for me, I think the thing I am most interested in outside of distribution is also kind of ownership of narrative and story. I believe deeply that the people who should own the narrative are, first of all, not the people who currently own it. And then second of all, that those people should be the people who are most affected by it and also have the most experience with it. That doesn't mean that there's not room for meaningful, and that's really, that word meaningful is really important, leadership from people who are not affected by it. In fact, if you only have people with lived experience, you're probably only talking to people with lived experience, right? You need the other people because they're giving a different perspective. They're validating different things. They're holding up a mirror to different people that you probably need with you. But it has to start from there. If it starts from there, almost anything can happen. If it doesn't start from there, it just gets like really hard. And I think Families Belong Together is probably the best example of this, which is the reason that Families Belong Together works is because everyone agrees families belong together. And you can say it like a million times. And who is going to be like, no, 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 I truly do believe in family separation. I just can't understand how you can't get, or we should absolutely put babies in cages and separate people from their families. Like, it's just, no one is going to say that. No one is going to say that, right? And now, is that the whole story? No, it's not the whole story. And I'll talk about that in a second, but it is really critical to start from a place that people can get into, right? You don't need to know all of immigration. Actually, you don't even need to know that it's about immigration to agree with the sentiment of families belong together. Do you agree with that? Yes, welcome. I'm delighted to have you. And that's super, super important, because if people have to read a policy paper to engage with you meaningfully, guess what? They're just not going to engage. Like, it's just period. So that is so, so important. The second thing about families belong together, I think, is really important. It was designed as an invitation to people who probably never thought about immigration before, who maybe even in parts of their policy and thinking conceptualization are what I will classify as anti-immigrant. Not everyone who participated in Families Belong Together believes that the parents of those children should not be in detention. Like, actually, it's a long-term effort to get many of the people who engaged with us to understand, like, no, not just kids, families. Families is the most important part of that sentence. It's okay for people to not be where you want them to be. That's my job as a community organizer, as a storyteller, to tell a story that gets people there. People have to have an invitation into the party. And then, you know what? Sometimes people are a little awkward. Sometimes they say some weird stuff. Sometimes they bring stuff that you don't like. That's okay. You like get there, you know, someone comes over and smooths it out. Someone's like, yo, don't do that anymore. Not cool, right? Like, there's lots of different ways to get there. And that really is, I think, so, so, so important, because millions of people who, if they had heard the word immigration, would have been like, deuces, see you later, came, not just said Families Belong Together or supported Families Belong Together or shared, but came out to rallies all around the country. And now, as part of their identity in politics, as part of their identity for presidential candidates, as part of a platform, are like, no, we support Families Belong Together foundationally. We use that to do all kinds of stuff that honestly probably people have no idea about, like divesting billions of dollars from the private prison industry, publishing books that are geared towards children to talk about the need for not adhering to borders, having conversations with people in detention and helping them advocate for themselves. It's okay that they didn't know about all those things, because what we needed was an entry point for people, and that entry point opens up a world of possibilities in them, in the movement and the organization, and then also in our country and in the world. And that's where we're trying to go, versus like, well, did you know that $30 million a year goes into blah, 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 blah. Like, it's like, no, I didn't. And actually, I don't want to know, and I don't care. That is like just so, so, so important.
Thanks, Jess. And we got a lot of policy students with us today, so it's not to say that those reports don't matter. It's just to say that we need
Someone has to read them, though.
has to read them though, and someone has to market them. And you know, Jess and Alicia live a little bit closer in the day-to-day to the policymaking apparatus in the United States, but the majority of Americans are like tuning into ABC or Netflix on a nightly basis, which really makes Cristela's work so powerful. And to shift it a little bit, you know, you've been you are a history maker because you've been at the forefront of so much, having the first show by a Latina on a network television, by being the first Pixar, you know, Latina lead character. You've had like successful Netflix specials, and you know, you keep doing all these things where you're the first, which is both remarkable and maybe sad too, that like that is the state of play. Exhausting. And I guess a question I have for you is, how do you pick how to, and maybe you could introduce to the group a little bit of your own background growing up on the border, but how do you pick when you're inserting your family's immigration narrative into your work? And what does that feel heavy or scary in not wanting to present a singular narrative to represent a whole group of, millions and millions of people, but also knowing that you have a chance to educate the millions of people that are watching the things you put out into the world?
So really quick, we've talked about child separation. We've talked about Mexico-US border. So I grew up in McAllen, Texas, which was known, like outside of McAllen. I use McAllen because that was the big city. And, so I grew up in a little town called San Juan. And in the 80s, I don't want to, look, I'm 44. You can Google it and find out. Why am I going to lie? But in the 80s, there used to be a lot of sweeps, immigration sweeps at people's jobs, where a lot of times in school, we would find out that one of our schoolmates' parents were gone, just gone. They had been held by immigration, border patrol, and we didn't know where they were because we were kids. So the child separation has always existed in some way or another. The reason that we have the access to the information is social media. We understand what's going on in real time because we actually have access to it. Social media can be amazing and dangerous at the same time. A lot of times I see people vilify and simplify the people that I grew up with. Now, I grew up in a mixed status family. Half of us were undocumented and half of us were documented. And I always say, I'm never telling you which one's which, right? Like we all look alike. But it's like this thing where people don't understand, if you don't have the specificity, if you don't have the voice in the industry, then how do you change it? And also, how do you change it? With me, I've chosen comedy because people hate being preached to. But man, you can really trick them into learning something if they're laughing. My first special, I had a joke about how like white people can tan. And I hate that I can't lighten. It's like white people can tan and they look like very like, they have that brown hue and everything. But if I want to get interviewed at a job, I can't lighten. And people laughed at it, but they didn't understand what I was trying to say until later on. And they're like, oh shit. Oh my God, I didn't get that at the point because I laughed. But then later on, I'm like, yeah, but it's the truth, right? Like there's a thing that happens when we talk about immigration. Let's make it very clear. I'm Mexican American, my family's from Mexico. We are the poster children of immigration. And that's one thing we have to change. When I go to New York, when I go to big cities and I hear accents that are not Mexican, I start thinking, oh, they're immigrants. It's like, oh, European immigrants. Oh, Asian immigrants. It's like, what is it, right? When we try to vilify the immigration point of view, a lot of times we vilify my family. And the thing is that I decided to use comedy in my work because I am actually the person that they don't talk about in the media. I was raised by a mother that never spoke English. I was raised in poverty. For 7 years of my life, I lived in an abandoned diner. We were squatters, and when I was a kid, all I wanted to do, my dream was to become the first female president of the United States. I just loved government. I loved politics. And everyone in my neighborhood said, get over it. There's no way you can do it. You can't even find food to eat. And I agreed and said, you're right. And I stopped it. And then one day I accidentally saw the Tony Awards and I'm like, whatever the fuck that is, I want to do. And they were like, you can't do this. And I'm like, I already listened to you one time. Like, we're not doing it again, right? And no kidding, my freshman year in high school, I went to an all-Mexican high school and we did a production of The Diary of Anne Frank. Mexicans did it, and my drama teacher said, we can do any story and tell any story that we want because we can understand what it feels like to be in an area, like in a point in our life where we can seek survival, have hope. Why can't we do it? And then I thought, well, wow, I love theater. You can play any part you want. Then I graduated and I tried to go to college. And my voice teacher at 18 said, look, you're Mexican. If you're lucky, you can do West Side Story and a chorus line. And I did. And I did West Side Story and chorus line. And then I thought, well, shit, look at me retiring in theater. Right? Because at that point, I would never get cast to be the sister of a white woman in a play, because apparently the people that go see theater don't have imaginations, right? Until Hamilton. Then you see three sisters together and no one in the audience is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Peggy doesn't look like Eliza. I'm out. You know, no one's saying like, damn, like, wait, Hamilton's Puerto Rican? I'm out. Everybody's just like, oh, a bitch is not satisfied. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like, and the thing is that in that point, like when I watched Hamilton and I saw the what grew out of Hamilton, you realize that people were paying attention to the story, not like breaking down who was what for accuracy or anything, because it really was about the story. It was about human nature, what we felt like. So when I moved to LA, and remember, like, so I started doing stand-up because I had to move back home to take care of my mom who was sick, and she died. And I grew up in a very old-fashioned household where my mom chose me to take care of her. And when it was time, I had to do it. When she died, I couldn't afford therapy. And I started doing stand-up to talk about my family, talk about my mom. Then I started noticing that people really related to my mom, even though they weren't Mexican. And, you know, there was a joke that I told about how, like, my job, because we had no money, my job in my family was to taste the milk to see if it was still good. Right. And it's like, if it's past the expiration date, that was my job, you know, and it's like and it was never good. Right. But there are people from that joke, they really responded to it because they're like, my family does that, but they're not Mexican. And then it turns out, oh, we have so much in common. And what everybody's saying right now, when we talk about like policy and stats and stuff, that's actually what I think is a big problem when we try to get political messages out during elections, when we try to, you know, get people to register to vote and what have you. It's like we throw at them a lot of facts and figures that they don't care about. All they need to be told is, hey, you know what? Your voice matters so much that people are trying to silence it. How does that make you feel? So when I created my TV show, I wrote the show and it didn't get picked up to pilot because the executives couldn't understand what I was trying to say, because I was trying to say the story of my family, but it didn't connect with what they thought the Latino narrative was. And they were the gatekeepers. So the gatekeepers create the narrative of people that they don't even know. So now, when I was developing the show, I got turned down for a pilot, and the producer, wonderful woman named Becky, said, you know what? It's never been done before.
No.
Yes. At least it wasn't Karen. Becky said, you know what? We've never done this before, but my show had a penalty. And basically in Hollywood standards is they say, we're going to make your pilot. If you don't, you're going to get X amount of money. So the penalty was $300,000. A pilot costs 1.5 million minimum to make. So my producer said, why don't I try to convince the studio to let us shoot the script we have, just as just kind of like a clip to see if they can understand what we're trying to do, because they couldn't understand the jokes. They couldn't understand why certain things were funny. And they all decided, why not? Let's do it. So we shot it. And it was this ridiculous night where everybody laughed and a lot of people didn't understand why. And we submitted it, and I had to go on tour in Canada for a couple of weeks. And then, you know, the studio said, oh, we can't afford to test this, so I don't know what you're thinking. So then they tested accidentally, and my character scored the highest, you know, score that they had in 7 years. I think previously it had been New Girl, right? And they couldn't understand how this brown girl, because I had a crooked tooth and I was plus size, they couldn't understand how I scored so high. So they gave it to the network, ABC, and they said, you got to check this out. I can't explain it. And ABC said the same thing. We don't have money to test it. It's like, okay, well, guess what? Like, I didn't even know Mickey Mouse was broke, right? Right? But all of a sudden, next day, ABC is like, oh, guess what? We found the money. It was probably hidden in the couch, right? So they test it, and I test the best again. And my show ended up getting picked up when it wasn't even in contention. And basically it got picked up because they couldn't understand what this was. All they could understand was that it was this family sitcom that didn't make sense to them. The year my show came out was the year that Blackish and Fresh Off the Boat came out. And my show was the only one that didn't get a billboard. And it was because there were executives that were both Black and Asian that understood the story that they were trying to tell. There was no Latino executive. So I had to not only pitch my life, but tell them that it was accurate. Now, I've never thought that my life was special, that my story was special, because everyone in my neighborhood had the same story. But when I went into that room and you realize that you're the only one that can actually explain something, remember this, you're not explaining it for your culture or your community, you're explaining it for yourself. Because you can't give a good explanation for what cultures are like. So for me, I realized, damn, comedy's the power. That's how you get people to do it. So I started telling these stories, and I tell this story, and we were talking about it before, right? It's like, it's just about trying to tell these stories where, like, my brother who's undocumented, one year after 2016 said, sister, calls me sister, right? He's like, sister, I don't understand. Like, I was undocumented for like years. Why is everyone undocumented on TV so sad? Like, I cry, but I also laugh. I go to concerts. I like to play guitar. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why? And I realized we're still at a point where we're not even allowing any immigration stories to be boring and fun. So we only assume that immigrants can be sad and depressing all the time. Why? Because so many of the gatekeepers have been taught that that's all we do. That's why I say in Hollywood, Latinos were around for Aztec times. Then we died. Then we came back in the 70s to sell drugs. And especially Latino women in Hollywood, we're sex pots in our 20s. Then we have to hibernate for 10 years. And then we become grandmothers. So in our 20s, everybody wants to hook up with us. And in our 40s, we're like, mijo, come here. So for me, though, I love making people laugh because I accidentally teach them something along the way. So that is something that I think everyone here needs to find out. Not that they're good at comedy or anything like that. I'm saying that what is that one thing that you possess, that you bring, that maybe hasn't been mined as much as anything else in the industry that you want to be in the world that you want to be in? For me, I am someone who grew up in ESL classes, graduated high school, didn't graduate college, became the first Latina to start a TV show, became the first Latina lead in Cars 3 for Pixar. And I devote a lot of my time to the community. And it's just what Jess was saying right now, like, you got to give the voice to the people that are going through it. But you also, like, for me, I love being in the community where I am allowed to share space with them. And I understand that my job is to not talk sometimes and let them speak with the microphone that I'm holding for them, because that's the only way to make progress.
Thanks for sharing all of that. Feel free to clap. I'll do one more question, then we'll go into Q&A. I was reading a stat to an organization near and dear to many of us on the panel called Define American. Our friend Jose, he wanted to be here, but he's too busy producing a Broadway show. So maybe he'll come in the future. But Define American put out a stat that 34% of immigrant characters on television are related to crime. Which I feel every day in my work as a policy advocate. I feel that every day when I meet a member of Congress, their first assumption about immigration is, are you asking me to support something that will allow all of the criminals in? Or have me portrayed as someone who is pro allowing all of the criminals in?
Which, can you add the part about how like actually the least likely to commit crimes?
Yeah, so there's multiple studies out there that show that, sorry, thank you for being the pros. I hate microphones. There are multiple studies out there that show that native-born Americans have higher crime rates than foreign-born individuals in the United States. Obviously, there's, crime as a concept in policing is a whole other topic area that I hope a fellow will discuss. But 34% of Americans are not immigrants, but on TV, the majority of our characters that we're relating to, where we see someone's humanity, more often than not, we're experiencing them in the context of engaging in crime. I know I'm guilty of this. I watch Narcos. I watch Mayans, the like motorcycle gang show. Like I consume this too, but I know that I feel that in my work. I'm curious, like, why do you, and I think Cristela probably gave us a lot of the reasons why and what she just described, but I'm curious to hear from all of you, like, how do we actually push through that, which just feels like a massive amount of culture being set in a very singular, negative, dark context?
So the organization that Alida referenced was founded by our friend Jose Antonio Vargas. You might remember about 13 years ago, Jose had won a Pulitzer Prize at the Washington Post for his reporting on the Virginia Tech shooting. And Jose was carrying around this secret, which is that he is undocumented. And he came out in this big New York Times reveal, told his story about leaving his mother in the Philippines, being raised in the United States, having no idea that he was undocumented until it was, I believe, time for him to get his driver's permit. And in tandem with releasing his piece, which I would argue was an act of incredible bravery, and was a small way of saying, look, what you imagine an undocumented immigrant to be is actually more complex and more diverse than you might imagine. He founded an organization along with me, Jake Brewer and Jamu Green, called Define American. And in essence, I think it has become sort of the GLAAD for immigration, the same way that GLAAD understood that you had to change popular culture in order to change the understanding of the LGBTQ plus community in this country. You need to do the same for immigration. And one of the things that we zeroed in on was the fact we also act as though immigrants and undocumented people in this country live in silos, in communities away from all of us, as though they are not in your church pew sitting next to you, as though you do not share doctor's offices with them, as though your kids who might be US citizens don't go to school with them every day. And such, when these people are picked up, when they are deported, it doesn't just impact their nuclear family, though to Jess's point about families bonded together, I would argue that that has ripple effects throughout society. It impacts all of us. It impacts who you see at the grocery store. It impacts who you see at school pickup, and that we needed to start telling a broader story about who immigration policy and immigration reform affects. That it wasn't just an economic story. It wasn't just a national security story. It was a story about community. And that has been part of the work that Define American has done as well, which is, I think one great example is NBC's Superstore, yes. Which was led by America Ferrera and Ben. Okay, there was a guy who played opposite America, and there's a character on the show who is undocumented. And part of what I thought was really special about that narrative arc was, here you have all of these folks who work together in a retail business, all of whom, the exception of him, are US citizens or documented in some way. And it's about how their lives are, thank you, how their lives are impacted when he gets pulled away. And to me, that was incredibly important, because that was, as a viewer, even if you do not have the experience of being an immigrant or being undocumented, you relate to everyone else in that cast who all of a sudden has a friend who is being pulled away and is being impacted. And so I think that was an example of it being done right. And part of the reason it was done right was because Define American who worked with them and was in the rooms making sure that the narrative was properly crafted.
Okay, let me build on that because I wasn't even planning on saying this, but you brought it up, and so I'll just keep going. So, okay, so how do you like get something like that, right? So Superstore puts out a story, right, about deportation, about ICE. Guess what? ICE has a whole entity that does a couple of things. One, they
They're
make
across
sure
the street, by the way, right on the other side of the circle.
I'll behave myself. Can't guarantee for how long. ICE has an entire entity that does some things that sound kind of innocuous, like make sure the uniforms are portrayed accurately and things like that. But also that like the experience of picking someone up from work is portrayed accurately. What does that mean? That's very interesting. What is an accurate portrayal of rating someone at their workplace? There is no equivalent in the immigration movement for accurately portraying what it's like when someone gets picked up at work. But ICE has an entire office that is devoted to accurate portrayals. And I think that's really interesting because, again, I'm obsessed with distribution. I'm obsessed with infrastructure. The government has a massive apparatus that helps make sure that their story and their narrative is moving forward. Immigrants and pro-welcoming, pro-orderly, pro-safe, all that stuff don't have the same type of infrastructure. It's beginning to be built, which is awesome. Define American is one of those things. There's actually a host of other kind of people who do that work. And I think that's really, really critical because you want to be able to have a host of people who can answer questions about like, well, this is what it was like when it happened to me. This is how I felt. This is like the physical reaction my body had. This is what happened to my family. Oh, well, you got to make sure to talk about this. Everybody knows about X thing. And that's really, really important because if the only thing that people are seeing and that the attention is being paid to is the government side of things, we're only going to get that side of the story. And I think that's like very, very clear. At the same time, I think one of the challenges that people like us have is what sometimes people call an owned voices problem, which is when people get the opportunity to be the ones telling the story, you're afraid, almost like fearful of doing literally anything wrong. What is wrong? No one like tells you or gets decided, but boy, howdy, they will absolutely make sure that you know you did something wrong when it happens. And I think that matters a lot because fear is not conducive necessarily to the best creative product. I would argue actually it's like the opposite of what you want when you're creating something. And we also put a lot on people like Cristela, people like Alicia, to be perfect all the time. You have to be a newscaster and you also have to have the most diverse guests and you have to have the most diverse topics and you have to, be absolutely positively so perfectly precise. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to like the most open, collaborative, generative like conversation. So there are also, as we are able to gain more power and tell more stories, we also have to think about what are the ways that we protect our storytellers, that we create the most creative environments for those stories, and that we make sure that we hold people accountable, because you should, absolutely, but that we create enough room for people to be successful in the telling of the kind of narratives that we're actively seeking out in the world. And I think like as a consumer, as a viewer, as a creator, as a distributor, that's something I'm like thinking about a lot. Frankly, as a person who used to be like the kind of person like, Alicia, how dare you? Like I'm also trying to start to think like, okay, wait, but if Alicia is not on the air, who is going to tell those stories? Because she is a place where many pro the future that we kind of imagine, people are getting the chance to be on TV for the first time. And let me just tell you, it is so hard to get to be a new person trying to get into like the news commentator space. And so having someone who's willing to give you the first try, which you're bad on the first try, is like really important. It's really important that when Cristela creates her next TV show, she has the opportunity to say what makes the most sense for her, what is going to be the most creative, is going to feel like the most authentic, and have that exploration live on whatever coming to a streaming platform near you. And that even if she makes mistakes, we hold her accountable and are still supportive of her.
I don't make mistakes.
In equal fervor, because I think if not, then what happens is, look, I'm just like telling you right now, there are not that many people who even get the ability to do those things. So if we tear down the people who have that ability, it's not like there's 100 people waiting, but it's also like there's not even 10 more opportunities to do it. And so that's like something I'm really, really thinking about. How can I, as a viewer and consumer, be supportive of the kind of stories and narratives and programs and people that I want to see in the world? And that's like both a mindset and a practice.
I'm gonna tag in here.
That was really good.
So in my perspective, I don't suffer fools. I don't like talking to people that I don't like. I give everybody a shot though, you know, but it's this thing where I got to tell you that in my industry, when I had the sitcom, I was in every audition that we had because I wanted to make sure that the actors we were casting as my family had the personality or the specificities that were close to my family. You know, they were trying to cast like a woman from New York to play my sister, but it didn't make sense because we had like, she felt like she was from New York, you know, and it's like, you couldn't understand. It's like the casting, it just has to be so specific for that manner, even though I was talking about like sisters and Peggy and everything, but it's like this thing where like, if you're telling this story, you got to be accurate. Years ago, the first audition I ever went on and booked was, I don't want to brag, but woman number one in Sons of Anarchy.
Shut up.
Yes, and I was shot in the head. Now, I'll tell you, I had a really great time shooting that. Everybody was sweet. Ron Perlman was awesome. But I didn't get a name. And that was a problem that I see in a lot of TV shows. If you don't give characters names, then the actors don't really think they're real persons, like they're real people. But after that, I would go on these auditions and I would get callbacks. And there was a run of like 5 maids that I went in for. And it was always the typical, can you speak with more of an accent, right? So it's like, yes, the breakfast will be late today, you know, and everybody's like, more. And I'm like 1 degree away from being a fucking piñata. Like, what do you mean? Like, nobody talks like, I don't talk like this. Like, how do you want me to play this character? Like, why do you think she has such an accent? Right? But it was like, they're used to doing that. But back to like the auditions, when I would get Latino actors, Latina actresses, you know, just actors, I would see their resume and a lot of them were criminals, cops, district attorneys, maybe, you know, and that was it. And I realized we weren't writing for comedy. We weren't teaching Latino actors about timing, about how to, like, you couldn't be funny in a sitcom, really. You know what I mean? And that's when I realized, like, all the woman that ended up playing my sister, her name is Maria Canals Barrera, and she was the mother on Wizards of Waverly Place, with a little unknown Selena, right? And
Sign here just to let us know how young this room is.
yes, yeah, I know. That's why I said it. I'm the cool aunt, but you know, but it was this thing where when I was getting the auditions to be a maid, I told my agents at the time that I refused to go on any more auditions like that. And my agents at the time said, well, that means you're going to get less auditions. And I told them that's fine. I would rather not. That was a choice. And I always tell people, in order to make progress, sometimes you're going to have to be willing to say no. But that's only if you want to. Don't let anybody make you say no. I wanted to say no. And it was just like what Jess was saying, like there's people that will call you out and say, oh, well, why this, why that? You know, in my show, I had a mother and a daughter and a mother and a sister, and they were both mothers. You know, like my mom, my sister, they were both mothers. I screened it for in Miami, and this woman after the screening said, why is it that the mom is so stereotypical? Like, why is that? Like, we're more than that. And I looked at her and I said, which mom? And she forgot that there were two moms in the show. And my point in having them be mothers was because it's accurate to my life, but also I wanted to show the evolution for generations, because I was telling my story, which is someone who was from Mexico and then first generation. So it's like when you're trying to make accusations, think about what you're accusing before you ask, because there might be an explanation, right? To me, I think that we do have to support shows. I think that like from a Hollywood perspective, I think that a lot of our communities can do harm, not knowing that they're doing harm. I think that a lot of like conversation, especially when we talk about TV shows, people will say, they'll name shows and they're like, none of these shows got a chance. None of these shows got a chance. And I'm like, well, one of the shows ran 4 seasons. That's not a chance. We should be celebrating that show. That's progress. You know, people used to ask me when I was starting the show, what do you think? Why is it hard for Latinos to get on TV? And I said, well, first of all, you notice that it's Latinos because I'm brown. But there's a lot of people that don't get on TV. Getting on TV is hard, right? But you're going to ask me that, right? It's kind of like when I was growing up, you know, as a brown girl in like South Texas, I would watch shows like Roseanne and just understand that Roseanne was that mother in that case. I never watched those shows and thought, man, that's every white mom ever. But when we watch Latino shows or we watch any shows that have any minorities and ethnicities, any culture, we assume that that's a representation of everyone in that culture. Why? So for me, I always say we do need to support shows, but I also feel that there are people that try to, you were talking about the owned voices. And I do feel like you should do what feels right to you. If you want to speak up, speak up. Because when somebody does it from a genuine place, the change can be noticed and people aren't stupid. They know that you're doing it for a certain purpose. It's not genuine. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in the vein of speaking up, I think that is a perfect segue for us to pivot to you all in the audience. Would love to hear what questions folks may have. I hope through this conversation, you've seen a little bit of, in some ways, both the scarcity of opportunity, but also like the innovation that could exist to create more opportunity, to create stronger narrative on this issue across different platforms. And so would love to hear questions from the, I see a hand already coming up.
I was like itching to ask my question because I feel like this panel, like I've been to a lot of like, sorry.
Who you are.
All right, thanks. My name is Anika Manzoor. I'm so excited. I'm like trying to like get everything right. My name is Anika Manzoor. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called the Youth Activism Project, and I was like a public policy got my master's in public policy. So I've been to a lot of these panels, and finally we have someone from Hollywood like in this panel, you know. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is because I'm in this moment in my life where I've been organizing for 20 years. I started organizing at age 12. And now I'm like shifting because I want to do what Cristela is saying. Also, your first Netflix special was hilarious. Anyway, I want to do what you're doing, right? Like I have all these story ideas that is like a synthesis of everything I've experienced in the world as like a multiply marginalized person, all the activism that I did. And like for most of my life, my activist identity was like here. And then my like obsession with like books, movies, like fictional narratives was here. And only like 30 years like living, I've finally been able to connect them both. And I think like, and I'm like, why have I kept it disconnected for so long? And I realized because like our fields have been disconnected, right? Like as activists, we have like a media strategy, right? We have like a list of contacts for journalists. We know how to write press releases. Where's the Hollywood strategy? Like, where's the connection to, okay, so yeah, so that's why I don't really have a question. Can y'all just please?
Can I tell you that for the past, so the first special that you mentioned, I have 2 specials on Netflix. One's called Lower Classy, the other one's called Middle Classy. That's Ascendant. But you know, it's this thing where I have spoken to a lot of friends that are in politics and organizing about the importance of making messaging more entertaining. And it's because of what I was saying, comedy tricks people into learning. And I think that for the longest time, we're still at the point where people don't realize how to use social media in a way to reach people in that field, meaning activists, meaning like elections, you know, movements, because we need to get them in. And I've always said that Hollywood is, you know, the reason that so many things like AI and robots and everything that we're talking about now, a lot of it comes from old movie plots that I almost think people were like, can I do that though? Yeah. Can I make real life Terminator 2? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like that thing, right? For me, what I've learned and what I think is needed is almost like, it's almost like a production company that can focus on messaging in political world that treats it like Hollywood. And if you want to do something in that manner, I actually think the best thing to do, like to tell stories, because that's one of the things that works with me is being so personal about my life. I tell everyone everything, right? But it's this thing where if you're personal, start telling stories that you think are interesting about your life and actually do it online. And let people notice what it is that you do. Because honestly, there's so many people that think, we forget that as different as we are, we're so alike, you know? And having that, for me, I'll be honest, I have to write my TV shows. No one's writing for me because they don't have a character like me. You know, I'm sarcastic, I'm a nerd. I was telling them I was in my hotel room playing my Nintendo Switch before I got here. I'm 44, I love Legos, you know what I mean? I love sci-fi comic books, and everybody always thinks, but you're Latina. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot, that doesn't exist in our world, you know? So it's like creating that narrative to tell people that someone like me exists is so important. But you wanna know what? I gotta warn you, if you wanna be in that world, I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna be exhausting. Yeah. Because you have to create your own world. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, it's like, that's why when people say, well, when are you doing your next show? Like, when are you creating another show? They're not asking me, when are you getting cast in another show? What are you going to do? It's like, when are you building your own world? Yeah. But that's what's needed. In order for this, for policy, for activism, for messaging to work, we have to evolve and make it not only factual, but entertaining.
That was great commentary and question.
Well, I'd love to hear any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think just being platform agnostic, like not getting super wed to like it needs to be in the form of a television show or it needs to be in the form of a film. Like in addition to being exhausting and all the things Cristela said, the barriers to entry are just extraordinarily high. On my podcast, Latina to Latina, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It's so good, legitimate. It is really good. There's this woman named Christy Hawberger who used to be an agent at CAA, and she talks about of having a professional metabolism and how she learned she produced a film and she realized her professional metabolism was not set to having a project that came out every 2 years. And I've actually found that extraordinarily helpful. Like I have a podcast that comes out once a week. I have a television show that airs for 4 hours every week. Like my metabolism is set to like, I need to do something now. Cristela has learned how to sort of pace it so that she both has shows that are in production, but she knows that can be a year, 2 years of lead time from concept to when it's actually on the air. In the meanwhile, she's building her specials by going on the road and performing every day. She even puts things on Instagram and on Reels, like podcasting. Like I think not deciding, not working backwards from like, well, it has to be a book. It's like, what's the story? And then which of these mediums has the lowest barrier to entry? You can probably talk about YouTube a little bit, which I think is a really undervalued way of reaching people.
Yeah, I plus both what they said, and I would add a couple things. One is, I think like your question is a really good one. Like, what divorce? Like, if you work in politics or policy or like anything kind of in that advocacy, whatever, it's all head, right?
Yeah. Where's the heart?
Where's the
right?
heart? Yes. And I think as a person, as a community organizer who also like accidentally owns a radio company and like dabbles in Hollywood shit, and like I guess I'm kind of an influencer too. Like I hate to say that, but it probably is.
She's a bona fide.
It's very
passionate
It's just, it's like, it's really, it's like really bizarre. What I have learned is you can be influential in trying to move hearts and minds in a lot of different ways. I think Hollywood is one of the best ways, also one of the most fun ways. But
the one with the least guarantee.
Yeah, that's a great, that's a really,
for most people.
Yes.
Like you can have a show.
That's a really good thing. Yeah,
that never sees the light of day.
yes. And I think like for me, what I have learned is we have so much more control over the stories and the way that we distribute those stories than we ever have before. And I think on your path towards breaking barriers and all that silly where we go, like remember that, because at the end of the day, you could get all the way there and make the best fucking TV show ever known to mankind. You don't put any marketing money behind it. Nobody ever knew your TV show came out, right? Like, and
That happened to me.
I just like I don't know, in a hypothetical.
Wow, I'm right here.
And then, I think like a thing that like one of the things I have understood as a person who like does primarily organizes on the internet. The one thing I love, my absolute favorite thing, is when someone comes up like, a thing like this and they want to talk to me and they say words they like I have put in their mouth, or like and like you don't even know that the reason you said that thing is because of this thing that I did, right? And it's like, fuck yes, like it's working, right? Like, and I think that like feedback loop actually is really, really helpful. It's also helpful for me as I'm creating, because I'm like, like when a lot of people engage with you on Twitter, Twitter's not the world, all those other like caveats, you do start to like workshop stuff a little bit to be like, oh, right, when I say this, that's better than if I say this. And I think that stuff is really, really helpful, because you got to build your craft as a creator in the same way that you built your craft as like an organizer, right? And I think that as we try to get into like multiple disciplines, it's really important to know that like, if that hasn't been your ministry, you got to like work up to this new ministry that you're like trying to make. And then you got to understand like, what are you saying from your pulpit? You can't say everything. So you got to say the thing that's so unique to you, so like amazing. And I think when we do that, honestly,
I actually just use an example.
Please.
So Jess, who is sort of known most for the work that she has done in politics, whenever there is a big red carpet event, she will like break down people's outfits. She'll do fashion commentary, makeup commentary, and she's bizarrely grown this Instagram following that is largely predicated on that. Mm-hmm. There's great power in that, both because she's like brought you in for the dresses, like politics exists in many forms. Like after she did a live show recently, she's like, I forget what you said, like, darlings, remember, like I don't comment on people that I know, and I don't comment on people's bodies ever. And that to me is a political statement that, like, again, you might hear people repeat, not because they came to be preached at, but because it's like, oh wow, she managed to do this. It was interesting, compelling, and she didn't do this catty thing that other people do, and I didn't miss it. Like that has a generative feel.
Yeah, I think actually the fashion thing is so weird. Like it's really just my hobby, and then people liked it. But like I thought a lot about that specific thing, because I was trying to figure out, like, people wanted me to comment on a certain person, and honestly what they really wanted me to comment is the fact that she lost a bunch of weight. I don't want to talk about that. That's like not what I'm doing. So I think there's also points too where like we make decisions about how we're talking about things, what we're saying, who we're highlighting, what we're featuring. It's really, even in small ways, like almost small influencer, it's it's very powerful for you as an individual and then also for the platform that you build.
Any other questions? Please.
Hi, my name is McKenna. I'm a student at AU. I'm a BA MA student in the sociology program. I just want to thank you all for being here because an all-female panel at AU is rare, let alone women of color on the panel. So this is very refreshing. My question is, Jess, you
All
mentioned-
Latina, probably.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for being here. My question is, Jess, you mentioned like we have to protect our storytellers, which I think is so important. And each of you are storytellers in your own way. How do you prevent burnout when your professional life is so tied to like the activism that you're doing, especially when it's right about your community, it's about your personal narrative. When you're speaking, advocating about your own, you know, your community struggles and the marginalization that your community faces, and you're also trying to add your own personal spin on it as well. How do you kind of navigate that space when you're trying to protect yourself as well as continue to be passionate about the work that you're doing?
Okay, let me just say what no one else will say here. All four of us are completely burnt out. So like we don't preach from like a place of having that figured out. I will say for me, some really clear boundaries of.
That was intense.
Sorry.
That was like, I'm in your personal life, which she is.
Sorry, no, so I want to validate that.
Yeah.
And that's across the board, and that I don't have an easy answer for it. I will say there are things, took Twitter off my phone for a period of time, and not being in that constant feedback loop as a public person was extraordinarily helpful to me. Putting some guardrails around in general, like that on social media, which is where I feel that there's the greatest feedback and loop. Whether it's taking it off your phone periodically, not looking at mentions, like I think there are ways to do that. I'll let someone who's better versed talk about self-care, but for me, even just like building those parameters has been really helpful.
Actually, I'll say that I have never Googled myself.
Wow.
I have never read anything written about me. On Twitter, I have muted certain words that I would just assume people would say about me. I don't follow people that I don't know or would like to know. In 2016, after, I don't want to spoil it, but something big happened. I decided to, I know. No, I decided to actually step away from my career. And I realized that for me, the most important thing was to try to help my community, and not only just Latino, but people that are lower income that might not have access to certain information. You know, found out I was diabetic. So like, you know, trying to explain to lower income community some of the medical programs that exist and stuff. And, you know, a lot of it is actually very important to me that it be done word of mouth, because a lot of people don't have access to the internet, which I realize is a problem that we need to fix. But also, but at that point, people told me that I was being really stupid, you know, because they're like, they're going to forget who you are. And I didn't care, because that's what I needed to do at that point. I didn't want to be part of the, you know, pop culture of it all. I didn't really want to be this person that insulted people so publicly to try to get my way ahead of this in this career. And really, I was just more concerned about people being okay. But I also, I'll tell you, I'm very old school in that I don't really look at my phone a lot. I kind of treat my cell phone like an old phone. You know, it's like, sorry, we used to have phones against the wall, guys. But, you know, it's like, you know, but it's this thing where like the burnout, when you feel burned out, do something about it.
Yes.
That's the number one thing. You know, I want to brag, I have therapy money. You know, if you don't, keep praying. But you know, it's like this thing where my psychiatrist put me on meds for anxiety and depression that I didn't know I had. And I come from a family where we don't talk about that. They're not real. And my psychiatrist actually said it really well, because I was very nervous about taking meds. And I applied this to a lot of my life. You know, he always talks about how so many of us are so quick to take care of ourselves if we have a physical ailment. If our body feels like not well, not 100%, we will take care of it. We will take an aspirin, we will do this, we will go to the doctor. But why is it that emotionally and mentally we don't? You know, and he, in regards to this, it was talking about meds. He says, when you take a med, it's almost like what it does for mental illness, which I struggle with, is that imagine it's a circuit breaker and one little circuit's off and the meds help you be normal, like, you know, be average, like working at your capacity. If you had high blood pressure and the doctor wanted you to take medicine and it could fix it, would you? So I always place that in regards to life, where it's like, if you're burned out, stop and do something about it. Take some time off, because whatever you're doing, if it's a lifelong dream, it takes a lifetime. There is no ending for it. And you are of no use to anyone if you're burned out. And you need the rest, which is something that I struggle with so much, because I come from a family where you have to work all the time. If you have downtime, you're going to work.
Even rest is so you can work some more.
Exactly. Like if I'm sick, I'm like, well, I'm at home, I should be cleaning. You know what I mean? But like the burnout, you got to listen to your body. You're of no use to anyone, not even yourself, if you don't take care of it. Anything that is there will always be there.
I think one dirty secret that people didn't tell me that I wish someone would have told me is, I think the way people talk about careers is like, you work really, really hard and then eventually you'll get to be in charge and they'll be like, you'll get to make all the decisions and like weirdly it's going to be easier. Actually, it's a total lie. Actually, you work really, really hard and then you get more responsibility and you get to be in charge, and it's harder than anything you've ever done and it's more difficult and you work more, right? And so I wish someone told me that earlier. The things that you do now as a human, as a student, whatever, are the things that you will keep doing as you like grow older. So in college, I waited until the very last second to write all my papers every single time. And you know what? To this day, I still wait until the very last second to send the memo, to write the paper, to prep for the panel. Like the habits that you form at like the habits that you've been forming your like whole life, you're not going to like magically wake up and change because you're like in charge. That's just not how it works. So it's actually really important to begin to institute those things now. Like a comment that my husband and I make all the time is like, this is not a way station until we get to our real life where we're like our most aspirational self. Like this is our life right now. And I think that took me such a long time to learn. So like I have a lot of systems in place to help to curb against my worst impulses. They don't always work, but those took me way too long to set up to support making it possible to do all the things that I do and to live my life the way I like want to live my life. The other thing I'll just say, it's like very in vogue to be like, I want the soft life. And I want to like work as little as possible, but also I would like to be like magically rich and have like such luxury. That's just not how it works.
Oh, and have impact.
Oh yeah, oh right. And also I would like to like make the most impact ever. Like that is not how it works. That is not, I just like need to tell you that. You're not going to have a soft life and also be like magically rich while being like a community organizer and also like be famous and make the most impact in the world. That is not how it works. So in graphic design, there's this thing of like cheap, fast, and good. And I would say you can be rich, you can have impact, you can work only a little bit, but you can't, and like in graphic design, they'll say you can have like 2 of 3, but you can't have all 3 at the same time. Ditto. You can't be rich and make impact and not work that much. You can like probably get 2 of those 3 things and you should decide what problems you want to have. For me, like I like to work. I like to work a lot. Like a lot. I love working. I love work. So it's like, okay, well then that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna work a lot. Not rich. You know, like working on that too. So, and I suspect that if I got rich, I would like lose soft life or whatever, right? So make the choices about what you want and then create the systems that allow you to live the life that you want right now, not in some like aspirational future.
And to end on a corny note, I think in Jess's one day going to write a book on this, but one way to help protect our storytellers. Sorry, I've really failed at this. They're going to talk about this for months on end. I really messed up on the microphone. But one way to protect our storytellers is, and anyone to survive the systems that we're living in, is through community. And this is when I cry.
Yeah.
But you know, we're all, Cristela in her busy life flew from Los Angeles to like talk to the 40 of you, and like, but we're also gonna go get dinner right after this and like love up on each other and talk about how hard it is and how messed up it is and how much of a fight we still have ahead. But it's like, it's your community that sustains you. And if you're not making intentional time in this work to love people in the process and to be loved by people in the process, it will run through, you will be burnt out to the point of no return, because the people are who sustain you through it all. So I just want to express my gratitude to my 3 ladies who also came down from another state. Los Angeles is a little further, but she also got on an airplane to come here.
Can I say something really quick about supporting the storytellers?
Yes.
And use you and Alicia as examples. So when I had my show, I didn't know if anybody was watching it. And then we met, and I realized that Alida told me that she liked my show, and it made me feel good. Alicia interviewed me when I was promoting my show, and we became friends. And even when I had my Netflix special coming out like last year, like we were on a thread trying to figure out how to get publicity for my special. And that is an example of supporting storytellers, is that like when something comes up, it's like, okay, well, what do you need? How do you do it? And the moment you meet, you understand that you're going to be around each other for a long time.
So thank you all. We'll hang around if people want to come up and chat for a little bit, but really appreciate, I know you guys just got off spring break, so you're like probably not hungover, but a little tired. And we appreciate you being here tonight, and thank you. We'll see you at the next seminar.
Another hand to our amazing panel of beautiful join you for dinner tonight. That sounds like it's so fun. But thank you again for coming. We really do appreciate it and your time. We do have another seminar, Alida, coming up, as well as a career conversation where you can ask her more questions about how she got to the point in her career where she is at. So look forward to those and register for those as well. There's more information on the handouts. Tomorrow, we also have Terrence Samuels from NPR coming for a seminar in the afternoon in the same exact room. So we hope to see you guys there. Next week, there's a couple seminars as well. So check it all out. And thank you guys for coming again. Thank you. Thank you guys.
What do you want to do?
Yeah. Don't stop.
Oh, in front of my ass.
And then I'll answer that question.
I want to go. Yeah,